Thank you, Miru, and I also want to thank the Mayor's Innovation Project for giving me the chance to be here. It's wonderful to have a chance to speak with you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit just about a general framework for thinking about local housing policy in your communities, and some questions to be asking as part of developing a comprehensive plan or redeveloping a comprehensive plan that's right for your community. I'm just going to breeze through a number of ideas to make time for us to have actually a conversation. But I'm really interested in going into depth in any of the ideas that are of particular interest. So affordable housing, as you know, is an ongoing concern in most of your communities in some way. You have different types of housing needs, different types of constituencies, but it's been getting a lot of attention lately in the media again. What we're hearing obviously is since the downturn in many communities, not all, rents have been rising quickly, eating up greater and greater shares of people's paychecks or income, leaving them with heavy cost burdens that are making it hard to make ends meet, if not creating the need to cut corners on other household necessities. Worst case scenario, this filters down the housing spectrum, and households are finding themselves evicted, seniors, families, considering couch surfing, maybe even going to shelters on the street, worst case scenario. So it's I think what's growing, what the attention is driven by right now is that this is not just affecting very low-income households as it has for many decades, but rising rents are also pinching the middle class. And just the latest in the many stories I've been seeing to kind of track this, as if it were something out of the blue, is how rents have been rising as a share of income for the median income household in various parts of the country. This is from the Wall Street Journal just a couple weeks ago. And as what you can see is that this is the share of rent over income for the middle income household in parts like Miami, San Francisco, New York City. That median income household is paying close to 45% of their pre-tax income on housing. But this is also affecting the heartland communities of Nashville, Raleigh, Atlanta, parts of the Midwest that we know, the Rocky Mountains, et cetera. And it's a long-term trend. It's certainly more severe as you go down the income spectrum. And so our research at the Center for Housing Policy has been looking at how many households are paying more than half their income on housing? Because at this rate, you're really something that has to give. You're really having to cut corners on health, on food, much less invest in your kids' education, save for college, save for retirement, have a cushion if a job loss or a temporary health situation affects you. These are things you know, but I think what's just striking is that almost 8 in 10 households at 30% of median income or less are paying more than half their income on housing nationwide. This factors in all 50 states. And more than a third of those households at 50% of the median. So what's an example of an extremely low-income household? We're basically talking about minimum wage, maybe up to $10 to $12 an hour. That's your income for your household. A lot of single-family parent families fall into this category. Very low-income households, you're branching more into preschool teachers, child care workers, home health aides, certainly restaurant, hotel staff. A lot of households are under a lot of stress right now. And this is not a short-term problem. We know that the rising rent issue in particular is being driven by long-term forces. There's a surging millennial population, right? The biggest generation in our nation's history. They're preferring to rent longer. They're also joined by households that maybe have put off home ownership because they still can't qualify for a mortgage. Their credit's not good enough. Standards are very tight right now after the downturn, understandably. And we have a ballooning senior, older adult population. As many of you know, this is not brand new to any of you, but I was struck by the statistic that by 2050, our older than 65 population will double, and the population of 85-year-olds and older will triple. Many of them want to age in place better, but some and many are also going into rental situations to be closer to grandkids, or to find a home that's closer to where they need to go because they don't want to drive as much as they used to. So we also have this demand that's outstripping supply. And not all of your communities, but many, I know, are far behind in meeting the demand for rental housing, so households go elsewhere, and it pushes up rents. Some of the cities, like in Washington, D.C., this is a major imbalance. It's going to take a long time to match supply to demand. In the meantime, there's going to be pressures on rents, and homes are going to be continually offered at luxury prices, $1,800, $2,000, $2,500 a month for one bedrooms, as we're seeing in some of the most difficult housing markets. We think at the Center for Housing and Policy about kind of 4 areas of housing traits that matter for families in your communities. The affordability is closely related to stability. Also the location of decent housing and the quality of housing. We think about these as essential components of any comprehensive plan because it's really hard to imagine success for our residents without a decent, stable, and affordable home. And ideally in a neighborhood that's not locked off from opportunities, right? This is fundamental for children succeeding in school. We learn more and more about. Volumes of research are contributing to what we know about how a stable and affordable home affects kids doing better in school. Just research came out a couple of weeks ago from Johns Hopkins University showing that when households are paying more than half their income on rent, their kids' math and reading abilities suffer. When they have affordable rents, we're seeing that they spend more on child enrichment, and the kids develop cognitively better. This is a comprehensive study controlling things like location and income. But we know that the location, ideally, of affordable housing has some connection to opportunity near strong schools, or at least strong out-of-school programming. And then, of course, a healthy home affects so many things about our lives, but also the ability of kids to learn. I'm just going to talk about affordability strategies because we only have a short while. And there's enough to talk about there, and there are a lot of linkages between these issues. And so just a framework that I found helpful for thinking about strategies that work in increasing the availability of affordable options in different types of communities. This is a somewhat emphasis here on the affordability. So we're talking about hotter housing markets where that's the prime concern. I know that doesn't cover the entire nation. I'll take these one at a time. So, as I talked about, supply in a lot of communities is lagging demand. To create a long-term solution, we need to be expanding development options. Now, not all of your communities have unlimited space to grow, and you may not be looking to reach 40-story buildings. There are some limits to your development potential. So 2 ideas I wanted just to put out there are about how do we maximize development options for below market rate housing, intentionally affordable housing. One is to make the best possible use of our public land. There's a lot of obvious places and a lot of maybe less obvious places where communities are finding space for affordable housing they didn't think existed, and in neighborhoods they want to create more affordable housing choices. So consider when you're redeveloping public facilities. All of us here probably know of a joint development between a library and an affordable housing community. School facilities sometimes have extra land that maybe are no longer being used or could be redeveloped in a place outside of Cleveland. There's a great new housing community that's been built that has paired senior housing with an intergenerational school, creating an opportunity for the seniors there to tutor the kids more easily after school and even help out in class. Parking lots are often looked at as ways to develop more intensely, where the economics work to build a structure in the housing above. They're also very usually regular shaped, which helps because irregular lots are so often tricky. Hospitals, agency headquarters often have extra land. But a lot of communities are finding it necessary to rezone parts of their community to increase the overall housing supply, and while they're doing it, to increase the feasibility of affordable housing. So you may have land available. It may even be adequately sized, but is it properly zoned to make it feasible to build at a scale that's economical for affordable housing? A 40-unit development, for example, minimum, and that has some efficiencies with the parking that's right for that neighborhood and that development, and minimizing the land that needs to be spent on housing cars. Second idea I wanted to kind of present is kind of category of strategies is to capitalize on market activity. Most immediately, when communities upzone, there is an opportunity to tie in affordability expectations. So this is something I had a chance to write about last month. I wrote a report about inclusionary upzoning and about how the rezoning opportunity and moment is creating a chance for places to create an incentive or a workable requirement for a share of affordable housing in new market rate developments. And that this linkage is helping places overcome legal, political, or market barriers that have previously prohibited inclusionary housing per se in their community. So an example, in Fairfax County, where as this is a large-scale development, they've added 5 new metro stations to the suburban county, and they're redeveloping the streets and the whole feel of the neighborhood. In this community, when development proposals come forward, they can build under the existing zoning and no further conversation, but there are additional redevelopment options being offered to build a lot more dense and taller. But with that, this offering comes with an expectation, which is including 20% affordable housing in the new development. And that 20% is what works for that particular scenario. They're giving away a lot of development potential. Other places it might be 5, 10%, 13%. What's really interesting is that this is incredibly popular with developers. Almost all of the land around the 5 metro stations has been spoken for. They're expecting to create about 2,500 affordable units in their overall development over the next 15 to 20 years. And they're also asking commercial developers that voluntarily request these redevelopment options to contribute financially with a big impact. $64 million is what they expect from the office space, the hotel space. It's also going to be taking advantage of the now suddenly greater redevelopment potential. We could talk, question?
Just a real quick question, because we throw these terms around so loosely.
Yeah.
When we're talking affordable units, are we talking principally rental units, ownership units, or both?
Well, that's a good question. Often the policy is set up that if your market rate housing is for sale, we want the affordable units to be the same. Some policies, though, have a lot of flexibility. You can choose the tenure of the affordable units. In some places, they need rental housing, so they ask for that. I think it's either or in Fairfax. Yep.
Our state doesn't allow inclusionary dwellings, this type of tested that we want.
Yeah. Well, so this is what we call voluntary policy, and they've structured it intentionally so that you can take it or leave it. You can build under the existing zoning, but in the Tyson's Corner plan are these options layered over like an overlay zone. That if you, I could talk about another example in Arlington County nearby, where it's a form-based code. You can, if you want to access all that's involved in the form-based code, including the theoretically easier building envelope to work with, there's a 20 to 30% requirement on the net housing you create over what's on the ground. So it's kind of like it's a 10 to 15% affordability requirement. Now, Virginia doesn't have a blanket ban on inclusionary housing, but they got in a lot of trouble in 1990 when the Fairfax County's original policy was knocked down by the courts. So they have really deferred to these kind of proffer arrangements just to stay safe. But in Washington State, I'll just jump ahead, the city of Redmond does this in a state that's not traditionally embraced affordable, inclusionary housing, they've incorporated affordability expectations on a neighborhood plan by neighborhood plan basis and rolled it out slowly over time through the city. It just applies in rezoned areas, 7 areas in total. We built 308 affordable units so far. It's not Oregon, it's not Texas where there are prohibitions, but Ashland, Oregon has a somewhat similar voluntary policy that is more tied to if you want to be annexed, there's an affordability expectation.
Quick question. Are
Yep.
the affordable units absorbed into it, or are they the crappy units are over here?
Right, that's a very timely question. Every policy is different, and where it's, I think, most workable, the policies will allow for some flexibility. Maybe you build 2 separate buildings, or the affordable building on site but next door. In Fairfax County, they technically give you the option of building off-site, but they strongly encourage on-site. All the developers are proposing on-site. It can be hard to find a nearby developed land within the same plan area, school catchment district, et cetera, in a hot market. But I think powerful policies give you a lot of options where it's appropriate. Maybe you can pay a fee as well to meet your obligation that can be reused to meet other types of housing needs that would be hard to integrate because it might need service enrichment into the market rate housing. There's a lot of flexibility in the field, and we can talk about that more. Just 3 other areas I wanted to just lay out here. We talk about policies that can reduce the cost of building affordable housing. Coming back to zoning, zoning makes a big difference in the cost. When you have excessive parking requirements, it adds to the price. But zoning also can be thought of as a way to allow for a more diverse supply of housing choices. Many of us have probably seen containers now being repurposed as homes. I'm not saying go that far, but there's a lot of progress that's been made in manufactured housing, prefabricated housing, built off-site that allows for economies of scale that works pretty well in certain contexts in providing vastly lower construction costs. Zoning can also improve the speed and predictability of review processes for other types of options like affordable dwelling units, cottages for grandparents to live near their kids on a large site. The unpredictability of housing is so much of an issue that it often deters affordable housing developers from coming to our communities. And I think what I would suggest is if we can do everything we can without compromising the democratic process to create clear intentions and a clear path to building a predictable development envelope. This can be including by right development and places that have used design guidelines to kind of ensure they're getting what they expect have made by right development happen more easily. The affordable housing development community, nonprofit or mission developers are often cobbling together, as you know, many different sources to make it work, to link what rents can support to what the total cost of both building and operating a high-quality development is over time. It takes a lot. To the extent that localities can sync up the process for getting financing, grants, maybe on the same calendar year, and to kind of sync up the requirements, it makes it a lot easier to use the capital that you all are providing and to reduce the overall soft costs of the process, which can add up to a lot of consultants and a lot of staff time. And finally, as I'll talk about briefly, we need to be rehabilitating more of our housing in a lot of places. Sometimes standard building codes require you to meet the obligations for a new development, even when a minor rehab project is being done. So some places, a growing number of localities have found it helpful to have a separate rehab code that tailors the requirements for things like the width of stairwells, et cetera, to the nature of the redevelopment and the rehabilitation. I feel like I'm just touching on a couple things, and I'm more than happy to talk more. On that note, an essential strategy is, of course, preserving your existing assets and recycling resources. A lot of affordable housing that was built with the tax credit and other funding sources are now starting to expire. Even with 30-year affordability terms, we know that in hot markets, Section 8 accepting landlords sometimes opt out, and so do multifamily buildings, or they have the pressure to do so. So getting smart about where your housing is that's on the verge of expiring is the first step in extending the affordability. It's often a lot less expensive to preserve than to build new affordable housing, especially when what you're preserving is of minimum quality. Also, a pathway into stability is homeownership, and places that want to support homeownership have found it efficient to extend financial aid with shared appreciation expectations. The idea is maybe you limit the appreciation that they can achieve and share that back with the jurisdiction so that it can be put right back into the home for the next household, or reach other households through down payment assistance, recycle it elsewhere. The ability to kind of make one investment and to serve multiple generations of households is a crucial way to get more bang for your buck. And finally, I wanted to leave this to last, but it does take money. And with as much as tax credits can do and home funding and other support from the state government, there's no substitute for local capital. And what's really impactful about local housing trust funds is that you can tailor the requirements to the exact needs of your community. You don't have to serve that narrow band of households prescribed by home. If that's, or the ability to look at issues related to older adults. Where does the money come from, though? As you know well, a number of places they tie the revenues to the local housing market in some way. So just in Washington, D.C., where I live, they have segregated part of their document recording fee. It's generated hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think they increased the document recording fee. They just capture a portion of it, and they made it a priority to make that available for affordable housing. Places like Seattle have on a regular basis put in front of voters a property tax levy that amounts to about $65 a year, but is producing over time hundreds of millions of dollars that they have incredible flexibility of how they use. And we know of localities that have asked for commercial developers to be part of the solution. That might mean a commercial linkage fee, where you ask new employers to provide toward workforce housing needs in the community through a fee that might be $3, $10 per square foot. It might mean matching and encouraging employers to contribute to employer-assisted housing. It's often hard for a developer to be the first one to do this. Matching support for an employer that contributes to employer-assisted housing often gets more employers involved in the game. Either way, local capital really leverages a lot more than in state and federal housing dollars. It can really extend your impact. I was asked to talk about some questions to consider. Just a few, as you're developing a plan, I talked about matching programs. Local housing resources, sometimes like in California, are automatically matched by the state government, but it's often not known. You want to be looking, of course, at your land supply. Do you have adequately sized sites that are properly zoned to support multifamily housing in particular? Is there publicly owned land that's underutilized or it could be redeveloped to include affordable housing? Or in some places, do you have strategically located land that might be ideal for, like, say, a stadium, a private stadium, that could be swapped for that developer's private holdings elsewhere in the city that might be more suitable for housing? Are there large-scale redevelopment efforts planned that might be an opportunity to offer redevelopment potential for affordable housing? Could you reduce the time and costs and unpredictability of getting land use permits for developers of all types, including affordable housing developers? Is there an appetite for a property tax levy or some other local source that could boost your impact and leverage your state's investment in housing? And are there non-financial networks or resources out there? In many communities, people are creating villages to support their older adults to help them live in place through volunteer networks. Lastly, just 3 overlooked allies, school administrators, nonprofit hospitals, and transit operators. A lot, I think, of good can come from talking to your local administrator about what the needs are of their students when they're out of school. Nonprofit hospitals, as you may know, have to meet certain community benefit requirements. But under the new ACA, that's expanded now to include community building activities such as the development and rehab of housing. It's something that was new to us and is a potential partner as long as your plans are synced up. But hospitals are looking at how they can support healthier housing. And finally, transit operators are great to talk to about opportunities for mixed income transit-oriented development as we understand more about the importance of TOD for supporting transit ridership. This is my contact information, which I know you have through other means. And I want to just call out one website which we operate, housingpolicy.org, which goes into a lot more case studies so you can find about places that are actually doing this so you don't have to just take my word for it. Thank you.